Hello, good morning, and welcome everyone to this morning's debut webinar brought to you from Talk Think Do, talking EdTech, the future of education. Firstly, just to reassure you, there won't be a PowerPoint deck in sight. And secondly, to reassure the techies, there's also not going to be any Excel spreadsheets. Waiting for queuing laughter and so on. So my name is Dan Meinik. I'm the CTO at Talk Think Do. I lead the company in strategic technical direction, crucial research and development, and also build flourishing partner relationships with our technical partners, notably Microsoft, where my career first started. So Talk, Think, Do, we help our clients do more with technology, empower innovation, and enable digital transformation. We work closely in partnership with Microsoft on their artificial intelligence and cloud offerings. So this morning, I have the pleasure of hosting two distinguished experts in their fields. Firstly, we have Bill Mills, owner of Explore Learning, a leading private tutoring provider that teaches maths and English to children across the country, aged between 4 and 14. Bill has been working with us at Talk Think Do to help them grow using technology, and he'll be sharing his experience with us today. So good morning, Bill.
Good morning.
And secondly, we've got Rob Belgrave, CEO of the expert hosting cloud company Wirehive. Rob cares passionately about digital community and is an expert and respected peer in the industry, including being the co-host of the brilliant Alexa Stop podcast. He'll be sharing his outlook on what the future holds for EdTech, including some of his experience working with the University of Surrey. So good morning, Rob.
Morning, Dan. Morning, Bill.
So after that, with as much time as we've got left, we'll move on to answering some of the questions that you may have. And if we don't have time to answer all of them this morning, we'll gladly follow up. So during the morning, drop your questions that may crop up in the Q&A on Zoom, and we'll try to cover them. And thanks also to people that have already provided us with some questions that we can answer as well. So if you can see us in the background, follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter by searching for Talk Think Do. But now, I'd like to set the scene of this webinar by talking about my, albeit limited, experience in EdTech and see what I'm seeing today. So as a techie, my experience started 20 years ago. That feels pretty bad actually saying 20. But when during university, I was an intern at Microsoft UK in Reading, and I sat my MCP exams in a computer lab, answering questions on a beige computer box, having studied them from a well-thumbed book shared with me from my team. And then back then to study, you sort of either bought or acquired books or found what you could scrabble for, limited online. So for any techies, there wasn't sort of the wealth of information that there is now. Now that those same exams exist, but you have to prove you're not cheating by filming your surroundings with your webcam and doing a load of weird online safety checks to do stuff. So the tech's improved somewhat, at least from my experience of exams. There's also a myriad of online learning courses from multiple providers. But from my experience, most of this is like self-paced training courses based on prescribed linear curriculum, or sometimes even worse, it's a curriculum that someone else has copied and is offering at a cheaper price, and it's just been repeated. My children, however, it's a bit more interesting. They enjoy a much more richer experience at school. So this is commonly through like a hodgepodge of different mobile apps that their school has encouraged us to use, like TT Rockstars for their maths times tables, and Doodle Maths is another one which I see crop up every now and then. But whilst quite good, they've never really engaged massively with these, despite like the apps being quite cleverly designed to try and compete with what is their undying obsession for online games like Minecraft and Roblox. So anyways, meanwhile, since my early days, the explosion of cloud computing recently has meant that powerful compute power, scalable platforms, and artificial intelligence is now available to the masses without like a huge upfront capital outlay. That means that that's led to a revolution in how businesses and consumer apps and systems are both created and provided to their users. So personally, this explosion in the advancement of cloud compute is quite frankly, one of the most exciting times to be involved in tech. Things are moving so fast and the things we can do are pretty amazing. So it means that myself and my team can create and manage some pretty amazing solutions that simply wouldn't have been possible like 5 years ago. And I could go on for ages about this, but I won't, because otherwise you'll never stop me. So with the lockdown in the UK brought on from the global coronavirus pandemic and children staying at home, which I sort of personally shudder at because that was a massive distraction for me, at least, forced out to my garden shed to work. UK schools were forced to provide remote learning with no time really to prepare. And whilst they've done a great job, it sadly left children falling behind. At least that's what I keep telling my two kids anyway. So the lockdown has forced us all to grasp new technologies. So myself, I use a lot of online tech, like online shopping and banking and so on, but not everyone did. And that suddenly became a bit more the norm for a lot of people who otherwise would have shied away and preferred bricks and mortar experiences. So there's that, and there's also rapid tactical cloud solutions in business and enterprise, just simply to allow those businesses and the wheels of their business to still turn whilst their workforce is based from home. So that caution to the wind that was thrown to allow business survival has been like a eureka moment in demonstrating the massive benefits of modern cloud platforms. I think there was like a meme online that said, who was responsible for your migration to the cloud? Was it your CIO or your CTO? And no, most of it is COVID-19. So this, combined with uncertainties on relying solely on physical class-based education, is a really powerful combination and accelerator for exciting innovation in education today. So as an example of incredibly exciting EdTech platform, myself and the team at TalkThink2 have been working on for the past 12 months a project called Compass, which will be covered in more detail shortly by Bill. This platform uses cutting-edge cloud technology to provide accelerated learning journeys for children, but combines this crucially with the human aspects of tuition. So with that as a backdrop, I've got the pleasure of handing over to Bill Mills, owner of Explore Learning.
Hello. I thought it might be helpful if I gave a little bit of an introduction to Explore so that you kind of understand the point of view that I'm approaching this from. And then I was going to talk about how we've used technology and gone about developing in order to achieve our aims in those areas. But Explore Learning's been going for about 20 years now. And before lockdown, we had 144 centres across the UK and 37,000 children who attended them as members. And what being a member meant was that your parent enrolled you, they paid a monthly membership fee, and you as a child came to us twice a week for hour-long sessions, so possibly after school, possibly on a Saturday morning. And we've had a blended model from the beginning, by which I mean that we combine really fantastic tutors with a highly interactive and adaptive curriculum software tools, and then we deploy those in what we hope are very compelling environments. So it's bringing those three things together: tutor, interactive curriculum software, and compelling centres. Before COVID, everything happened in centre. So all face-to-face, no at-home learning. And our age group, as Dan said, is primary and the transition to secondary. So children from 5 to 14. And so I'm very much coming at things from the point of view of that age group. And we really had, before COVID, identified 4 key areas where we thought technology could make a big difference to our business. And I think COVID has then highlighted a 4th. But the first of these is the need for ever improved individualization. And actually, if you talk to our parents about why they're coming to Explore, why they're sending their children to Explore, they very often use a phrase in respect of their school experience. They say, we just feel his individual needs aren't being met. And I think there are a couple of things that have exacerbated that over the last 20 years or so. And one of them, but funnily enough, is the national curriculum. The national curriculum came in 30 years ago. Each new version of it is a little more prescriptive. And while it's completely understandable that in a kind of a state-led education system, you have to have some common standards, what it means is that we're marching children through a very prescribed curriculum according to how old they are. And yet we know as parents, as people who work with children, that every child develops on a completely different path. And what's right for one at a particular moment isn't necessarily right for another. And so there's this great need for individualization, but the organizational model of primary schools and the quite strict resource constraints mean that it's very difficult to deliver in a primary school any very much individual attention. And I think this is an enormous area where technology can really be a complete game changer. And I'm going to talk particularly about Compass in a moment. The second thing is that I think parents, everybody really, have in almost all areas of their lives become used to consuming much, much more flexibly than they ever did before. And just to give one example, our first few centres were all co-located with Sainsbury's in a partnership that we had with them. And 15 years ago, they used to talk about families generally being loyal to one supermarket, doing a big shop once a week and a top-up shop once a week. So that meant 2 visits, and that was a fantastic fit with us. Sainsbury's will tell you that that has completely disappeared. There's none of that loyalty. Parents shop with a range of different supermarkets. They shop online. They get deliveries into their home from Deliveroo and Uber Eats. And often they'll just message each other as they leave work. Do you want me to pick something up on the way home? And I think in education, there's a similar transition to make, and moving towards delivering education much more flexibly, so that we're not just delivering education during the school day in school, but actually giving children the opportunity to continue learning, at home and in the school holidays in all sorts of flexible ways. And the third thing is that we all know the difference that it can make if parents become truly engaged in their children's learning, and if they can establish a kind of positive dialogue with their children about their education. And I think there's an enormous opportunity to use the kind of communications revolution to communicate with children, with parents altogether differently in order to promote that engagement. And then the last thing is really as a result of COVID. I think we've learned how children who were positively engaged in their school education and were well supported at home, by and large, have continued to learn through COVID. But those that weren't, their education has really stagnated, and that's increased a pre-existing divide. And I think, again, technology can help to close that gap a little bit. So what's our approach to trying to deliver those 4 things? It's actually a whole suite of tools. It's developing a number of different things that we can develop together and that can all talk to each other and complement each other. Just to mention 3 of those, the first we implemented a year ago. It's called Dora, and it's what we call a membership management system. It's very similar probably to a school management system, which pretty much all schools deploy. The second I'm going to talk much more about is Compass, which is our new cloud-hosted curriculum, which we are starting to roll out this month and will be completely rolled out by the end of November. And that's been 18 or 24 months in the making. And then the third is Navigator. It's a web and app-based tool for parents that links to both Dora and Compass and allows us to communicate far more effectively with them, but also allows parents to engage in their children's learning through what we've called Fearless Profile. So understand the progress that their children's making, see the skills that they've mastered, see the skills that they're working on, to book sessions, to book appointments, for us to serve reminders to them and engage with them altogether differently to what we had before. But I think what's probably of particular interest to this audience is Compass. Compass is something that we've developed with Talk, Think, Do. It's a huge tool, so roughly 35,000 questions across maths and English. It maps the curriculum all the way from reception to year 9. But at the heart of it is a sophisticated logic engine. So this is the the engine that determines the path that each child takes through the material. It uses a mastery principle. It serves questions in a mixed format, but it looks within each skill for a pattern of mastery. Having recognized a particular skill as mastered, it will in a couple of weeks come back, just serve it up again and check for retention. But having mastered that skill, it will then unlock further skills in the hierarchy. And the beauty of that for us is that two children can come into the center together. They might be friends. As far as they're concerned, they're doing exactly the same thing, working with the same tutor on the same tool, but they'll take completely different paths through the material. One might move through it very quickly. Another there'll be much more foundation building and reinforcement. And I think it's an example of how technology can really individualize learning for students. The second thing is that we have come from an environment where everything happened face-to-face in center. And our parents always telling us how much they valued that face-to-face personal interaction. So when we developed Compass, we did it very deliberately trying to enhance the role of the tutor. And I think it's very easy with technology to think of it as you're going from a teacher interacting with a child to a technology tool interacting with the child. From our point of view, that's completely wrong. So everything we've done within Compass has been to try and improve the interaction between tutor and child, and trying to give the tutor a range of tools to interact and support the child. The third thing is that we built it from the beginning to be very flexible in how and where it was delivered. So we can deliver in center, we can deliver sessions in home. Those in-home sessions can be tutored or untutored. And because the tool links in with Dora, which schedules and records sessions, and because it links in with Navigator, which serves the fearless profile to parents so that they can view their child's progress, that the whole thing works in a very integrated way. So those are some of the features of Compass. In terms of COVID, I think I mentioned it, but before COVID, we had 37,000 members. We now only have 23,000, so we have lost a third of our members. We had a period, though, where all 23,000 of those were learning entirely from home. We now have a mixed economy. We have just over 100 centres open again, and we have children who are doing all of their session in centre. We have some who are doing some sessions in centre and some at home, and we have some who are now members of some new virtual centres. We call them Explore at Home Oak, Explore at Home Beach. So I don't think we will ever go back to delivering purely in centre. From this point forward, it'll be a much more flexible form of provision, and we'll only be able to deliver that if we continue to develop the technology to support it. So, those are some of the things we've been prioritizing. I think they're all very relevant in schools. Compass it's currently live with about 500 children, but it'll be being deployed by the end of November across all 23,000 of our members. And we'll learn, I hope, very quickly how to enhance and improve it. Just lastly, the National Tutoring Programme. It's obviously a government initiative particularly aimed at trying to support those children who have been particularly left behind in COVID. We have made a bid for it, quite an ambitious bid. But one of the things that I believe is that because Compass can deliver online and completely individualized for each child, but in a 1-to-3 ratio, I hope that we'll be able to use the National Tutoring Programme to show how tutoring can be delivered in a more cost-effective way than in the kind of traditional 1-to-1 model. So, yeah, those are my thoughts.
Okay. Yeah, thanks, Bill. It really is like an exciting space to be in, isn't it? I think we've been working really closely with your in-house data science team and the curriculum team to sort of really hone and fine-tune that logic engine, and that's sometimes leaves my head in spaghetti, but it's pretty sophisticated. So it's yeah. If there's any questions from people, I'm sure there will be. We can move on to answer those later on. But now, to lead on to what those overall trends look like for the future, I have the pleasure of handing over to Rob Belgrave, CEO of Yhive. Over to you, Rob.
Thanks, Dan. Yeah, cheers, Bill. I think it's amazing work you guys are doing, and more relevant now, funnily enough, than ever before, perhaps. Not that it wasn't already incredibly important. So a bit of sort of short intro to me and my history and why I'm here to talk a bit about EdTech today, and then some thoughts on a few areas. So as Dan mentioned, I'm the CEO of a business called Yhive. We're a cloud consulting business, which basically means we help organizations solve problems with cloud technology. There are lots of those in the digital age, whether it's how to scale your amazing online learning platform through a pandemic, or how to make your university more relevant for your students through the use of modern technology. We don't just work in education, we work across pretty much all verticals, but we've done a number of projects in the education space over the years as well. That's my day job. By night, if you like, I'm the co-founder of a social enterprise called Ecology, which is a tree planting and reforestation platform. If you like anything I say today, why don't you go and buy yourself and the world a tree? That would be fantastic. So I think I wanted to start with talking a bit about my own relationship with education, because I think everybody has quite a personal relationship with teaching and the way they experience learning and education. So I grew up in Oxford, and I went to a state school, which was a good state school. The state schools go, but ultimately resulted in classrooms with 25 to 35 children in them. I'm massively dyslexic, and I don't learn very well in the kind of traditional, syllabus created in the 60s, sit in a classroom, read off a board style. And I think, so some of Bill's points about that need for ideally one-to-one teaching, right, is the best, and you have to kind of work back from that. That was certainly the case for me. Like I wasn't stupid. I didn't have a low IQ. I had a capacity to learn, but I found learning in that traditional way that was being offered to me just wasn't very effective. And so I think I always was looking for alternative ways to learn. And for me, the internet kind of saved my life in many ways, in that what I was able to do was to teach myself in a way that worked for me. And I was able to do that through online video content, through community and interacting with other people, and learning by doing. And ultimately it gave me the skills to become a top tier technologist, and subsequently found a successful technology business, right? And all of that without university. So I'm not saying that's the path for everybody, but I think technology for me has sort of democratized different types of learning in a way that just couldn't have happened without it. And so it has a really special place in my heart, this debate about how tech can enhance education, and the whole kind of EdTech movement, I think is really interesting and really timely as well. So there's my sort of lead-in diatribe. Let's talk a bit about some of the work we do and some of the things I see happening that I think might be interesting to discuss. So one of the public projects that is all case studied up and approved for release that Yhive has done recently is some work with the University of Surrey. If you're interested to read the full case study, it's on our website, yhive.com. But the kind of key frame of it was, actually, most universities are still pretty backwards in terms of where they're at in their technology journey, which is surprising, I think, because a lot of them are seen as quite progressive, but the reality is they talk quite a good game, but they really haven't got there yet in terms of a lot of their implementation. And so what University of Surrey were looking for us to do was to help them migrate a load of their services, apps, the sort of suite of digital tools that empowers their entire campus, students, faculty, residential, everything, to the cloud. And that means they were trying to take it from equipment that lived on premise, on site at the university, and move it to, in this case, Microsoft's platform, which is a complicated and frankly fairly elaborate program of work. We're talking about, I think it's about 150 distinct applications or implementations of different types of technology, all of which need to be carefully planned, in some cases redeveloped, and hosted in a way that means they're not reliant upon the physical location at the university, and they're scalable and more cost effective to run, all this kind of stuff. Part of their desire to do that was, ironically, to deal with things like pandemics, right? It's about being more flexible in the way in which you can deliver your technology, and to accommodate much higher loads, I suppose, much higher levels of concurrent visitors on things like online learning systems for rewatching lectures in video format and things like that. So I suppose the summary here is, actually, on the whole, education as a sector is still really behind the curve here. I look at where our private sector clients and non-education clients are, they tend to be quite a bit further ahead in their deployment of these technology platforms than education is. And I think that's a real shame, but also a real opportunity. So I think if you're watching this today and you're in this space, I think don't assume everybody else is doing this better than you are if you feel you're not there yet, because actually, in many cases, even the best Ivy League and Oxbridge level institutions aren't great yet in terms of their deployment of some of these technology platforms. And I talked about my love letter to the internet, right? I think the internet created this amazing opportunity to disrupt and still does offer an opportunity to emerge as a new leader in a sector. And I think in education, that is still the case from my perspective. I look at the business and institution that Bill and his team have built, incredible growth, right? The scale of what they put together is remarkable. And that's something that I know they've worked out for some time, but that is, equally, it's not like it's Oxford or Cambridge University and they've been going for hundreds of years. So I think use technology, spot those opportunities that are in front of you to do something different, do something better, and ultimately, hopefully, impact the lives of thousands or millions of people. And I think the scale that technology offers you is the thing that for me is most exciting. And so I think to round that off, I'll talk briefly about something called the X Prize, which some of you may have heard of, but I'm always surprised how few people have heard of it. So I thought I'd just summarize it briefly. So the X Prize is an amazing initiative set up by a guy called Peter Diamandis, who's sort of old school Silicon Valley hero success story. And basically, it's a competition to solve the biggest problems that exist in humanity. So what they do is they put a big bounty on the table to incentivize teams from all over the world to kind of go hammer and tongs at solving a problem. And it's all kinds of stuff, go and have a look at them. They're crazy, some of them. How do we explore the deepest depths of the ocean? How do we go to space? How do we, it's moonshots, right? But the one that they did a couple of years ago was all about learning software for impact, which I thought was really interesting. And the mission was basically, how can we provide universal access to quality learning in an open way? And I think the benchmark was it had to be usable on an Android device that costs less than $50 to buy. So the idea was, how do we get high quality, and this was just like literacy and numeracy for primary school age children. Like how do we empower this huge global population who has no access to learning, which is, in my view, and is considered by them to be a basic human right, through technology? And they pulled it off, right? They for the bounty, 2 teams, they couldn't separate the winner because they both had this, the same level of impact. One was a UK and Kenyan team, the other was from LA. And I've got the stat here because I think it's remarkable, which is before the X Prize field test, 74% of the participating children were reported as never attending school, and 80% were reported as never being able to read. So incredible numbers. And after 15 months of learning using the Pixel tablets that Google donated to the project, they halved that number. So, I think EdTech and online learning and these sort of innovative, directed or otherwise learning platforms can have huge impact. And I know one of the questions was about this idea of learning architecture and the sort of directed versus flexible learning. And I thought what's really interesting about the X Prize winners is the 2 projects, one was flexible and one was directed. So it proves that it can work both ways, actually. And they couldn't separate them in terms of the results, which I think this is not my area of expertise, but from my understanding of it, I think that's quite an interesting observation. So anyway, look, there's a waffle on me and tech and education. If you're anywhere in a technology journey and you need some help, we'd love to help at Wirehive. And if, like so many of us at the moment, you just want to do something to salvage the mess that is our planet, then do go and plant a tree on ecology.com.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks very much for that, Rob. So we've got a lot of you have already in advance of the webinar have been sending us in some questions. Some of you hopefully have been adding some during the talks already. And if you haven't, if you've got a question, please add it to the Q&A on Zoom right now and we'll do our best to answer them. So what I'll do now is I'm going to flip over to the questions and just read through them. And so Bill and Rob and myself included, I'll just read out the question and then we can all have a stab at what we think is the best answer really to help these people. So Babak Dami, who is head of marketing and communications at PaveGen, thank you for asking this question. So what does the panel think will happen with interactive learning? And will tech make learning more distant or more interactive and personal? So should I start with you, Bill? Are you okay with that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think everything that we know about children and their parents is that they hugely value personal interaction, and particularly I think at the age group that we're involved in, and the face-to-face aspects of learning. And when we talk about tech and interactive EdTech, we mean a variety of different things. It could be a child on a screen, engaged with some kind of education software, or it could be engaged, with a tutor, and perhaps supported in the way that we do by an interactive curriculum tool as well. What I think ultimately will be valuable and will really, if you like, move the dial is tech that really does enhance the role of the tutor, of the tutor or the teacher. I think you've got to try and make, enhance the primacy of the teacher, if you like. And so, if you can deliver that, then I think you can get a really great virtuous circle going. So that would be my thought.
Okay, brilliant. Did you have anything you wanted to add to that, Rob?
Only to say that I think I agree with Bill's perspective, right? I think ultimately nothing beats a great teacher. The sort of cliche, you never forget a good teacher campaign that they ran is true, right? I mean, they tapped into something very real there. And so I think the best place to focus technology is on that. It's on scaling people, right? It's on how do you help great teachers reach more people in an effective way, and perhaps not focusing on how to replace those teachers entirely with technology.
Yeah, brilliant. I think in terms of my personal experience with my two young children, who's 12 now and 9, they spend an awful lot of time staring deep into the black mirror of their phones and tablets. And I think just in general, you think of like social networks and bringing people together, when actually sometimes the opposite effect happens where people feel more alone. So tech has an ability to either make us feel very lonely or actually bring people together. And I think with the work we've been doing with Compass, where you've got a tutor who personally understands the child's learning progress and can help them and gets to know that child, I think that really is a question of tech actually making or enriching the experience for a child. So the next question is from Daniel Cummings, who's Director of Integrated Learning and Technology at Chatsworth Schools. So thanks, Dan. So he says he's keen to develop IT equipment and software that supports blended and flipped learning. So I think it's probably a good idea if we talk about the merits of blended and flipped learning techniques. So again, probably Bill, blended learning is something we've been looking at in quite a lot of detail in the logic engine for Compass. What's your opinion?
Well, I described the kind of blended learning approach that we take at Explore. I think it's very effective. But I was particularly struck actually by Rob's kind of personal introduction at the beginning, because really that is a classic sort of flipped learning experience. Somebody who's not necessarily thriving in a teacher-led classroom environment, but does thrive taking some charge of their own learning and using a whole variety of content that's available on the internet to pursue what they were interested in. And the question for me is, how do you take that, and at the other extreme, the kind of requirements of the national curriculum, that we make sure that every child has that common core of education. How do we make sure that we bring those together, so that in finding a way of steering that flipped learning experience to make sure that actually we do cover those basic requirements of education. And I think the second thing is, how do we make sure that school really complements home, or everything that the child does outside school? And second, and thirdly, then how do we draw together the different participants in a child's education, which is school, the child themselves, parents, and I think the key to that is the type of communication tools that we've been working on with Navigator, but lots of others in the industry are working on as well. I think if we can have really good tools for monitoring and tracking children, and then communicating between parent and child and school, I think we can make flipped learning models really effective.
Yeah, agree. I totally agree with that. So, Rob, do you have an opinion on blended and flipped from your personal experience?
I think I kind of gave it preemptively today.
Yeah.
I think it, as I mentioned at the top of my segment of the webinar, I think for me it was critical to have that opportunity to participate in learning in that way. I suppose the key thing ultimately is that humans are very individual. They fall roughly into categories, but everybody is quite personal in the way in which they process information and interact with learning. And so the promise of technology is more personalization, I suppose, in many ways, and doing that in a way that is scalable, but as Bill so rightly points out, that you can still bring back to a kind of core syllabus, let's say, of things, and make sure that at least the kind of basic building blocks of what we understand to be the key parts of a good education can still happen, even if you go on a slightly kind of dotted line route rather than that very linear learning path that we were brought up on. So
yeah, and I'm seeing some questions coming in around questions around specifics around technology, and I think you can use technology to actually work out how is a child progressing through some sort of EdTech platform, and change your approach based on what taking the whole A/B testing approach that is used in e-commerce to see what gets a sale. You can use the same thing to see how a child is doing and how best they progress. So it doesn't have to be one or the other. You could actually use a combination of both. So Andrew Kingston from University of Bedfordshire has said, I think it's one for you, Rob. He's more interested in the detail of the University of Surrey project you worked on, and if there's any feedback specifically from the students.
From the student perspective, interesting. Hello, Andrew. Thanks for your question. Yeah, I think, what I can say from our perspective is we've certainly been told, and I'd be happy to introduce you to our connections there if you'd like to do more research for something very specific. But I think the students have definitely noticed an improvement in the availability and the access to sort of modern digital systems that make their lives easier. And so particularly the new intake, I think, who never knew anything else, are just kind of pleased with their experience. But the incumbent students, let's say, the people who lived through the transition, have had their learning experience as I was going to say members, they're not members, are they? Attendees of the university, right? Improved. And I think that the faculty also have found it to be very useful in terms of improving ultimately their productivity, and you can argue that has a net benefit for students as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite nice hearing about someone listening to in advance the perils of the potential of a global pandemic and actually preparing for it, right?
I mean, sadly, I think that was a coincidence, Dan. But these are the arguments that those of us in cloud technology have been pushing for years, right? It's about being, in many ways, you're solving your sort of disaster recovery problem by deploying cloud services properly. And nobody knew quite what or when that disaster would be, but it's about being ready, isn't it? And having those things in place preemptively.
Yeah, and then I guess the sort of less obvious aspects of that are then the ability for students to remote learn and all of the not having to be specifically on campus and all the benefits that sort of thing brings, and also availability at different times of day and all that sort of stuff, which just comes as part of life when you migrate to the cloud. So Bernadette McCurry, who's a student at UCL, previously teacher at Singapore International School and also worked at Pearson, so quite well connected in education, has asked, she explains that she was in Vietnam when COVID hit, and her school were prevented from delivering the online Vietnamese curriculum to ensure that those who were in private schools, like hers, weren't given an educational advantage over those who are in government schools where they didn't have that access to technology. So she's interested in how companies that are developing exciting new ways of EdTech, basically, what sort of approach they're taking to account for those disparities in technological capital, as she's put it, and access to those platforms. Is there any sort of partnership with organizations to ensure that this education is accessible for all? So, because I know, and I've been working on some of this with Bill, it's probably best to go to you first, Bill.
Yeah, well, I mean, I suppose the most similar experience that we had was, in March, where we had to transition our membership from sessions in centre to doing sessions at home. Our experience in Beaconsfield was very, very different to our experience in Barking. In Beaconsfield, we relatively seamlessly transitioned the membership of that centre. In Barking, which is obviously a mixed urban demographic, many different languages spoken, quite socioeconomically deprived. It was very, very hard to transition those members, and we managed to transition a much smaller proportion. It's not just because of lack of access to technology. It's also factors like the home environment. It is language barrier. If you're face to face with somebody, it's much easier to get over barriers from the fact you speak different languages. It's the education level of the parent which makes them perhaps less able to support their children. So it's all of these things. But I'm just a great believer, though, in just innovation being spurred by need and by people doing things, because the more you do stuff and the more you try and grapple with these problems, the quicker you learn to do them. And I think we're learning very fast because we've got to. And we're anticipating having to in the future. So we're shooting videos to help parents to overcome technology hurdles. We're translating materials. We're training our staff in how to get parents through these kinds of transitions. But I do. One does still come back to the fact that a part of the country that simply doesn't have decent enough internet bandwidth, will never be able to access this kind of stuff as easily as those that do. So I do think there is an ongoing policy need, which does, I think it does have a lot of focus at the moment to make sure that actual access to technology is reasonably widely shared. Because I think that to address all the kind of the key themes that I spoke about at the beginning, we do need good access to technology.
Yeah, thanks, Bill. Okay.
I would just add, I think I'll say the thing that you can't say, Dan, because it would seem a bit like self-serving. But okay. The reality is that this is where organizations like Dan's, Talk Think Do and the team there come into their own. It's in how you execute, right? We work with vast, let's just say a vast spectrum of quality of development shops, teams, technical teams, and developing technology in a way that is sensitive to this disparity in technological capability is really meaningful. There are definitely different ways of building these types of systems, and one way would rely upon high-speed fiber broadband at all times. Another might be much more sensitive to that, and might work better in poor connectivity scenarios, have offline modes, all that kind of stuff. So this is where technical execution really comes into its own, and making sure you're working with a high-quality team who understands not just how to deliver a feature or a service, but how to do so in a way that works for your audience. And that might include people with bad connectivity, for example, is really important.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. I think one final thing to add on that is in terms of the technology available to organizations thinking about embarking on a project. So I know there's a lot of universities here today. There's some quite amazing tech that you can use, and basically you just rent it rather than paying up front for it with cloud. So there is not a massive capital outlay when it comes to investing in some sort of solution that has like widespread use. I think the other thing is some of that tech you can use, like artificial intelligence, for example. You don't have to be a Facebook or Google or Microsoft, as an example, to be able to use that stuff. It's available to rent as part of, and just pick up and use as part of an off-the-shelf offering that you can integrate with your application. So in terms of, if you're like a university that's perhaps smaller than some of the Ivy League ones, and you're thinking, wouldn't it be amazing if we could offer this sort of solution to our attendees, to say the word. I don't know what the correct phrase is actually. The answer is yes. It's easy. It's just a question of what is a compelling offering for those students, basically. So we're getting close to the end of time, but there's a few more questions here. So Emma Crampton, who is a marketing design manager at Pearson, has said she's interested in learning about accessibility. And that was it. So accessibility is quite an open topic. I mean, we've already just talked a little bit about accessibility in the previous question about economic accessibility. Perhaps we can all just give our views on this. So, Rob, did you want to start actually on this?
Yeah, sure. I mean, look, I'll be brief on this one. I think technology, as I've said a few times probably already, democratizes access to education in a way that hasn't previously been possible. And I think that is as relevant in all contexts of accessibility as it is all the other sort of more obvious things like geography, technology, access, those kind of things. I think there's this really interesting truth in technology, which is if you design systems and services to be more accessible, even people who don't have accessibility needs benefit from it. So there's just no argument that you shouldn't do it. And the one that people always reference when they're doing talks at conferences on this is the one-handed mode for iPhone, where you could double tap the home button and it would like drag the screen down. What they didn't realize in building that accessibility feature was that it was amazing for parents with a baby in arms, because suddenly they could actually still use their phone with one hand, right?
Yeah.
That wasn't what they designed it for. But so just technology creates these amazing opportunities for accessibility, would be my view. Yeah.
Thanks, Rob. And what about you, Bill? Have you got anything to say on this?
Yeah, I think it's there's a kind of myth, I think, that tutoring, our business is the tutoring business, is something that's used by and therefore the middle class. That's not our experience at all. Our 140 centres have been in every type of community, and actually our biggest memberships and our most vibrant centres have been in quite deprived urban areas. So in London, sort of Barking, Whitechapel, Canning Town, places like that. And what that tells me is that really everybody is deeply invested in their children's education and very fundamentally concerned that they thrive. So I think it gives educators a real responsibility to to do everything possible to make sure that they have the opportunity to do that. And I completely agree with Rob that there's a real opportunity to use tech to make sure that that is the case. And, you know, yeah, so I think it is a big priority for everybody. And, you know, but it'll be just interesting to see what we can actually practically deliver over the next 5 or 10 years.
Yeah. Okay. And when it comes to I guess the technical aspects of accessibility, there has been some quite exciting stuff we've been doing actually as part of Compass. So we've been using the flashily named neural voices, which allow text to speech, but in a much more human and British accent sounding way, with the ability for us to change voices and so on. And also just, you know, there's the whole standard of providing like web pages and output in an accessible manner. So there has been, there's a lot in terms of making apps accessible. It's about choosing to do so, basically, rather than whether it's possible. So last question I've got here is from Gavin Stevenson, who's Digital Transformation Manager at Methods, working with the Department for Education. He's basically said he's expressed an interest in open, trusted sharing of student records between organisations for to better policy, services, and educational outcomes. So, Rob, this immediately screamed to me from my tech background. Blockchain. It seems like a pretty obvious contender for that sort of problem. What's your opinion?
Don't use the B word, Dan. It's dangerous in public. Yeah, look, I think there's still, I mean, the more current sort of public consciousness of this issue is NHS data and medical data, and do I have COVID, right, is the big thing everyone's debating at the moment. Am I comfortable scanning an NHS app? How is that information shared? Do I really want a database to know I do or have or haven't had this in the future? All this kind of stuff. The summary of this issue, which applies to all sensitive but potentially beneficial open data sets like health data, education data, etc., is there are emerging technological solutions for this. Blockchain is one part of that evolution. When they become proficient, I guess, you probably won't know that it's blockchain that's making that possible, as technology always fades away into the background when it becomes, you know, mature. But I think we're probably still a year or two from large scale rollouts of these types of things, but it's starting. And for the first time in ever, it should become possible to share this type of data in a really safe way at scale, which will create really interesting opportunities. For example, you could tap into a global database of pupil data and look at how certain pieces of information, you know, how people respond to them in different ways, and do that in a way that is anonymized, but still gives you access to the right thing. And there's loads of stuff that will be possible in the future, but we're just not quite there yet.
Yeah, I think we've been looking at some of the tech available, and it's impressive. So it's just a question of, I think a lot of this comes down to what are the outcomes of using that. You know, like you said, it's around the privacy, security, and so on. There's quite a lot of considerations, but yeah, that's, at least it screams to me blockchain, if I'm allowed to say it. But yeah, that's the nerd in me going ding, ding, ding. There's an obvious one, but Bill, I won't ask you about blockchain, much like you probably wouldn't want to ask me about the
Thank you.
Education specifics in education, because that's probably where the irony of me needing more education would probably be obvious. So we did have one attendee, I think, during the session actually ask about technology bridging the gap and connection issues and all that sort of stuff. I think we've already covered that already. So I don't think, oh yes, we have had some more questions actually. I'm just scrolling through a document here, so quite a lot. I'll ask a couple more. So Christophe Juliard, who's Director of Digital Marketing and Creative at Summit Education, has said they're interested in learning the benefit of AI, artificial intelligence, in somehow helping with one-to-one learning experience in a hybrid or digital environment. So I'll give a stab at that first, actually. So one of the things we found with developing Compass, and actually I think a lot of people thinking about using the benefits of AI in general, is to benefit from AI, you need data, and you need to gather that data first to be able to then allow something like a machine learning algorithm or something like that to then make decisions based on that data. And so the trick is always, firstly, having to work with a project without AI first in order to allow you to gather that data, and then introduce AI at the appropriate point. So that's one of the things we've been doing with Emily at Explore Learning, that your data scientist, Bill, is just getting to the point where we want the logic engine to behave in an appropriate way, so we can gather that data so that at the appropriate point, when we've got enough, we can then start taking advantage of this, exciting tech, basically. And we're already using other stuff. I mean, there's such a swathe of stuff, and I'll try and shut up in a minute. But off-the-shelf AI, like the ability to recognize people's emotion in their face as they're talking, or the ability for accessibility purposes, for example, to automatically index and transcribe video content, or convert text to speech, or vice versa. That's all available as off-the-shelf tech. So it really is quite an exciting space to be in, and it's just around AI is a bit of a sort of sexy buzzword in tech, but it's all about how you use it and what is the outcome you're trying to achieve from using that tech, if that makes sense. Rob, did you have anything you want to talk about with AI?
Yeah, I agree with everything you've said. I think we do a lot of work in this area as well with sort of data and AI projects. We have a whole consulting methodology specifically for this type of engagement, because it's such a common thing at the moment. And actually, more often than not, we do end up starting with the data conversation. We're actually running a workshop in a couple of weeks on a data strategy in a day, because if you don't have a data strategy, then it's very hard to understand where your opportunities are with AI. As Dan says, there are off-the-shelf tools that make some of these things very, very straightforward to deploy, but ultimately you need data. Now, data could be anything from text records in a database, it could be photos, it could be audio recordings, video recordings, whatever. But understanding what you've got, what you can capture, where it's going to come from, how you can store it, and all manner of other things is the kind of building blocks that you need to get right before you can deploy something with AI. But it does offer amazing opportunities to make services more engaging and ultimately more successful. Ultimately, a lot of these systems are just really good at pattern matching, right, with a very defined rule set. And so, again, thinking about learning at scale, I think there's a lot of opportunity there. So, definitely something to look at if you've got the opportunity to deploy these types of services. But data is often where you start.
Yeah, and I think that's probably something which you've seen, Bill. We can use AI to preemptively, I guess, work out where a child might be struggling or where they may excel, but we can then give that data to a tutor in real time as they're teaching a child to help them improve that learning experience, and introduce the augmented human aspect of, the teacher ultimately is the best person to deliver that content, or to work with the child as they're being delivered that content. But if they're able to then have that information at their fingertips, it means that they can just provide a better, more relevant experience to the child.
Yeah, I completely agree, and also just picking up on what you were saying earlier, I never quite know what people really mean when they say AI. But if we mean, learning from our experience using Compass about how to make it better, then I think there's an enormous opportunity for us. And, last year we delivered about 3 million sessions to children. So as you say, it gives us an enormous amount of data. And if we can use that to optimize the logic engine, and therefore optimize the path that children take through the material, then, and just to give a sort of trivial example, if we know that children by and large are struggling with a particular skill, then there's an opportunity to very quickly test whether, for instance, by building in an additional prior skill, we can give them a a better platform to get through that one, or actually is it a different strategy? And we can test all kinds of different strategies to help get children through the barrier of that particular skill. So it is exciting, but I think it's all about using data that we'll quickly collect to optimize and improve the tool.
Yeah, and I think that's the really exciting thing about it, is actually there is a massive opportunity for using data which you may not have either previously collected or valued in a certain way, and then using that to improve the actual in real time outcome of a child's learning path. So Daniel Cummings has followed up with the second question. So he's the Director of Integrated Learning and Technology at Chatsworth Schools. And he said to you specifically, Bill, do you use tech that you think works best? What tech have we been using on this project?
Okay, so I'm not our sort of Chief Technology Officer, if you like, but when we embarked on this journey, 2 years ago, our starting point was our membership management system. It's obviously not as exciting as talking about Compass, but I think having the two work together really well gives us a platform then to communicate much more effectively with parents. But we spoke to Matt Hammond, and Matt had previously, in a kind of earlier role, built a new membership management system for Fitness First. And he said to us that we did that 10 years ago. I think that now we'll be able to create a membership management system for you, which has sort of comparable functionality, but it will take 2% of the time and 2% of the resource that it took back then. And I thought, well, goodness me, how could that be? And he said, well, everything's improved. The database, the hosting platform, the programming platform, everything has improved. And we're using a suite of technology which is basically provided by Microsoft, and because it's all being provided, if you like, under one roof, I think it integrates together, and the different tools talk to each other so much more effectively. That there is the opportunity to get the overall suite working properly together much more effectively than it ever was before, when we might have had a series of isolated tools that did different jobs. Just what I said at the beginning, though, I'm not a technologist. But that's my kind of top-down perspective on it.
Yeah, well, my history is that I was also working with Matt at the same time at Fitness First, so I can personally vouch for that staggering difference in development time, which is why it comes back to what I was saying earlier about with cloud and cloud computing and AI. It really does offer like a completely revolutionary approach to developing software and providing solutions to businesses and their customers or their students. So we've got two last questions because we are a little bit overrunning now. But so Colin Hickey, who's Director of Media and Technology and in Enhanced Learning Operations at the University of Law, has said, with the term blended learning becoming quite prevalent in schools, universities, governments, and local authorities, do you think there might be a backlash to that term, in particular when it's been badly put together or rushed, which has led to a negative experience for students, schools, parents, or tutors? Is there a new term or approach we could call it instead? So that's probably, I'll start with you, Bill, actually, if you've got any input on that.
I suppose this is always a sort of danger with any, when you produce a term and use it to describe something that I think probably is kind of common sense for all of us. That for us, to get tutor and environment and curriculum software, really working together effectively is kind of common sense in a way, and some people I think will do it very well and some people will do it less well, and I think that's always going to be the case. So I don't think we should worry about that really. I think just each individual organization and practitioner is going to make sure that what they do works well.
And Rob, I think you and I are probably have a similar issue with the term digital transformation.
Yeah.
It's become a bit of an ugly word because a lot of people would misuse the phrase as something that's like a one-off project, and wondering why things haven't really worked out, or they've led with just the technology and not talked about the people and the processes and so on. So yeah, we understand about, sometimes but you still have to provide aspects of things that are digital and can transform. So sometimes it's about, I guess, getting over the word, or proving actually that with a solution that you can provide, that actually you can provide some more meaning and respect to perhaps what was an ugly term before. So we've had one last question, final question, from an anonymous attendee, saying that they're interested in how Explore access and report on their data to measure the success of their courses, both from the student perspective and from a financial point of view. So Bill, I'll ask Rob for that.
I think, in a very, very data-rich environment like ours, there's always a sort of an endless debate about, well, how do we report this in a way that makes it really meaningful and tangible to the parent? Compass, particularly in maths, is built around skills, and so the whole curriculum in each year group broken down into a large number of individual skills, and we have then this concept of mastery of skills, and so we've really used that across the business. We've used it in how we engage children in their learning, in how we feed back to parents. So we report what skills have been mastered, what skills is the child working on, what is the proportion of the total number of skills in this year of the curriculum is that. And we then give the parent the ability then to click on that skill and see an example of the question. And I think that's very powerful then in engaging the parent in their child's learning, because they can say to the child, gosh, you've mastered that today, I remember doing that at school myself, and I could never manage it, and so I do think that's very powerful. From the financial point of view, our business is very dependent on how effectively we enroll new members, and then how long we keep them for. And so, really good retention of students is important. And we found that there are two things that really, people who like Explore and stay a long time, they say two things. They say, we think you've got fantastic staff, and we can really see the difference that it's making to our child. And so to enhance the second of those, it is really important to report effectively to parents. And it comes back to what I was saying at the beginning, that actually, educators have understood for a long time what a difference it makes when parents are truly engaged in their child's learning, and when there's a sort of positive dialogue between parent and child. And so I think reporting and feeding back meaningfully to parents can really enhance that.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks, Bill. Rob, did you have anything you wanted to add on, I guess, the technical aspects of reporting and measuring and so on?
I mean, look, I can't offer any specific guidance on Bill's amazing product and business, but I think, just to round out on reporting, it's all data enabled, right? So break a record here, but thinking about how you collect, store, and process your data is often where to start. If you have rich reporting in mind, tools like Microsoft's Power BI is a set of tools we often are helping businesses implement at the moment. You can kind of stitch together data from all kinds of different sources, including that old spreadsheet, although maybe not, given what happened with spreadsheets. But yeah, you can pull it all together in these kind of modern tools. You don't necessarily have to rip everything out to start to get some really valuable insight from modern reporting. So just maybe add that to the end.
Yeah, I think Public Health England could have benefited from Power BI and a good data strategy. So I think one of the key things around this, without trying to be too controversial, one of the key things around this, I guess, is, and this is what we've done with both Dora and Compass, is Explore. We provide the software that allow Explore to actually own those systems, which means that you've got access to that data. We can then basically just easily make modifications. You're not locked into a specific SaaS provider who that perhaps isn't aligned with the outcomes and needs that you're interested in, that drive, I guess, the business success in your area. So that's the end of the questions. If you have any more questions, please do send them in. I know we're over time, so I'm going to rapidly wrap up. So I'd like to thank both Bill and you, Rob, for coming along to this webinar. I really appreciate your time. And I'd like to also thank everyone else for coming along and joining, asking questions, and really getting into the spirit of learning more about EdTech. So if anything you've heard today leaves you excited or interested to learn more, feel free to contact me or us on LinkedIn or Twitter. Search for Talk Think Do or go to talkthinkdo.com. But until next time, thank you very much and goodbye.